Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight on Gratitude Days. My name is Raina, and I'm one of the recovery coaches here at Capital Recovery. Tonight, we're going to be talking about 7 ideas to help give up negative thinking. So this comes from an article from Good Clean Love by a woman named Wendy Strager. And I chose this tonight because I thought it kind of applied to some things that have been going on lately. And shifting into that positive thinking when it comes to recovery can make such a big difference in your recovery. So this starts out by saying, our habits become us. Our lives are arguably the net sum of the behaviors that we repeatedly do. One could even argue that our personalities are molded over time out of the habitual ways we behave, influenced most strongly by the thoughts we think. This is partly due to our dedication to the known and familiar, which helps us manage the overwhelming busyness of life, and evidenced by the fact that although our brain receives thousands of sensory signals every day, it can only process dozens. In the same way, of the thousands of random thoughts passing through our mind every day, over 90% of them are repetitive, and for most of us, 80% of those thoughts are more negative than positive. That's a big chunk of our thoughts that tend to lean towards the negative instead of the positive. So it says that I've been working and writing about overcoming my own negative bias with intentional practices for years. It is still surprising to me that even after many years of practice, giving it up always ends me back to where I began. I think it's important here to acknowledge the power of the negativity bias, which has kept us safe in our human evolution. There is good reason to be overly vigilant to threats to our survival, arguably even today. Yet letting the fear, anxiety, and generally negative self-talk is not a winning proposition for a joyful life. As we all know too well, it takes only a moment for something bad to happen, while building good things takes time and persistence, which is true. Like, you can snap your fingers and something can just go in the wrong direction. But if you want to have something that lasts and has a positive influence in your life, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort and consistency. So she goes on to say that likewise, bad habits are easier to develop, but harder to live with, and good habits are harder to develop, but easier to live with. So that's a pretty profound statement. And when you think of that in terms of, addiction versus recovery, you look back and how quickly things could take off and how quickly things can get out of hand in the negative way. But when you come into recovery, it's like you have to start undoing all of that and, putting in more effort to build good things over time. So once we fully comprehend that we become what we repeatedly do, in other words, if we are repeatedly negative, we are negative. If we are repeatedly positive, we are more positive. It follows that productivity, excellence, and motivation are never singular acts. Rather, they are a life direction made up of hundreds of small choices every day. And that's something that sometimes you have to kind of look at things in your life in smaller pieces instead of trying to, take on the big picture and tackle everything at once, which can be kind of defeating at times and can contribute to that negativity or make you feel like you're not progressing. Taking things, one piece at a time, one step at a time can, allow you to have an overall more progressive process. So this explains the oxymoron that changing our life direction is at once so challenging and so simple. Intention is only valuable to the extent that it is accompanied by continuous vigilance and discipline. And that's a hard thing, especially that discipline part. Like some days I have none, and I'm just like, oh, and other days I'm focused, I'm ready to go. So, it's something that takes practice. So the habits which define us most completely are the ones that control our mind. She says that I began what has become a lifelong experiment to train my own negativity bias within an 82-day stretch of becoming painfully conscious of how frequently, yet invisibly, my negative self-talk arises. After that initial stretch, I was able to self-correct much more rapidly, but at every point where I lost my focus on my thinking, I had to begin again with renewed, concentrated effort. So I think that kind of shows us too how, this goes parallel with recovery. It's one of those things where like you have to make sure that you are, making a concerted effort on a daily basis. And you're going to fall short some days, and it's going to feel like things are harder some days. But that's when you got to take a step and recommit yourself and continue forward. So here's a short list of tips to launch your own positive thinking practice. Try just one of these and let us know how it works. So the first one is to make a public commitment. It says telling people that you are making a change to a personal habit, especially how you think, is one of the most powerful motivators for maintaining change. Being accountable for your intentions helps them stick, and people who live close to you can both verify and help make quick corrections. I think this is like really great. Being accountable for your actions is something that's like very big in recovery. Like you have to realize that the choices you make and the things that you do are basically what is going to let you progress in your recovery. So if you keep all those things to yourself, it's like, oh, well, I don't have to do that today, or I can just do that next week. But when you start talking to people about it and letting them know that this is like a journey that you're on and this is something that you want to strive for, and you have people around you that are supportive of your recovery, those people will check in with you. How are you making out with X, Y, and Z? Or, do you have any setbacks? Do you need like any, to somebody be a sounding board? Having people hold you accountable for things is a great way to help you like remain focused. So the next one is write it down and keep track. Anyone who has ever kept regular to-do lists knows the power of goal setting. The act of writing down your commitment to give up negative thinking can dramatically increase your odds of success. I wrote a positivity quest blog every day for years. Looking back on those entries now, it is clear how my deliberate act of interpreting a day's events through a positive lens accelerated the truth of my thinking changes. Even on days I couldn't get there, I was easier and more encouraging with myself. So this is great. This kind of like ties into the gratitude journal that we, keep reiterating through this. To taking a look at your day and focusing on the positive instead of dwelling on the negative. And one thing that's like proven is, you can tell yourself, I have to do this, this, and this today. 9 times out of 10, you might do one. You write it down, you're more inclined to make sure that you do what you wrote down. There's that power of putting pen to paper that just makes it stick and become something that is tangible. So number 3 is to choose one thing at a time. Change is about focus. It is not a multitasking event. We can only really change one habit at a time. Although when it comes to our thinking habits, one change can have far-reaching impacts. Basically, you're doing a deep brain resurfacing, which means that the neurological pathways in your brain are being retraced. So this is kind of like what I mentioned in the beginning, looking at one thing at a time, setting smaller goals instead of focusing on an overall, probably more intimidating or more anxiety-ridden, view of this big thing that you feel is not attainable. So when you choose to work on one habit, one thought process, or just one little thing every day, it's kind of like 90 days creates that habit. You wake up every morning, you make your bed. You know, a lot of people swear how this sets the day for a more positive and, you know, put together, you know, afternoon. I am very bad at that one, but you know, there's a little things that as you go, you can work on and see how that they can, you know, change how your day goes. So the next one is give it time and check in. So before you can count any new behavior or thinking pattern as a new habit, you have to practice it continuously for 30 days. Typically, check-in times after the first month are at 90 days and 1 year. The longer you consistently practice a new behavior, the more likely it will become a permanent fixture in your life's makeup. Again, that's what we were just saying, you know, about making your bed every morning, or, you know, any little thing that you want to try to do to improve your day, you know, being on a consistent basis with it. Number 5 is create a pause in your thinking. One of the most powerful mechanisms in changing thought patterns is creating a physical pause. Inserting an action that punctuates the recognition of negative self-talk gives the brain a moment to resurface and take a different path. So I don't know if you guys have ever done the rubber band trick to try to break you of a bad habit. People try to use it for smoking or anything else. You know, you think about having a cigarette, you snap the band, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to be doing that. And it kind of like resets your brain. So it's like the same concept. You mean the changing the thought pattern and just taking a minute to breathe and to take it in before, you know, just, you know, jumping into things. So a technique that has been effective for me is the wristband method. See, you know what's going on next here. Essentially, you wear a wristband. Even a rubber band will do the trick. And each time you notice your thoughts degenerating, you switch wrists. I'm gonna snap it, but you know, a little more effective. In the early days, I was switching my band every few minutes, and I like seen people do this. You know, have them on, and then you'll just see them snap it, and it's like, all right, you know, it's like they're working on something. They're striving for change. Let's see. So next, number 6 is to develop some believable replacements. Rather than elaborate affirmations, just having some go-to ideas about how you are thinking is all the brain needs. Paying attention to the how in your thinking and not necessarily the content of the thought was an epiphany for me. So that's a good thing. It's, you know, what is creating this, like this negative thoughts, instead of like what the actual negative thought is. Like, where is it rooting from? Where is it coming from? For example, does an event create a moment of curiosity or judgment? When setbacks occur, do you evaluate the situation or laying blame on yourself or others? The words we say to others or ourselves are symptoms of our thinking mechanism. Look at how we think. How we think gets you out of the personal narrative and lets you work on the deeper dynamics. So again, that's, you know, you're just kind of redirecting all this negativity. So, you know, if something doesn't quite go your way, instead of, you know, pointing fingers or you just letting it like kill everything else you have going on, it's like, take a second, breathe. All right, now why? Where did this come from? You know, what was the circumstances? You know, just kind of work through it and find the root of it. And as you progress, it'll just become easier and easier to lean more towards that positivity. And the last one is let go more often. Replacing my negative talk with other neutral or positive choices got easier pretty quickly. Unlike giving up cigarettes, overeating, drinking, or some other habitual comfort, it turns out that I didn't really miss the inner critic much at all. In fact, as she fell quiet, I enjoyed the space of the unknown and suddenly was more curious about everything. So, like, all of these, you know, steps to help you redirect that negative thinking, it's going to give you a calmer, sense of self, quiet your mind. That's a very common thing when you're new in recovery. Like your brain goes and goes and goes and goes. I've been clean over 4 years and my brain still doesn't shut off. But it's a matter of how you process it and what you do with it. And, one other thing I like to note as far as, that like helping with negative thinking, and because a lot of times we have the, mountain out of molehills, or, just like, oh, what was me, and the self-pity and all these other things, and thinking that, okay, one thing happened, it's like, forget it, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore, and giving up. There's one bit of like advice that I always tell people. It's like those thoughts, those feelings, they are all temporary. You don't want to make permanent decisions or just give up because of something that is temporary. And these, little points here to help with that, I think are wonderful. So like, just remember, it's like, take things one step at a time, be held accountable. Make small changes. Don't overwhelm yourself. And then relate it to something physical and something mental, or even like people, even a candle at home. You start your mind starts to go and you start feeling negative. You light a candle, the smell like will calm you, aromatherapy, like all these little things to connect the mental to the physical to help redirect you into a more positive thinking space is going to be, so impactful in your recovery or just everyday life in general. So it's kind of a quick night tonight, but we'd love for you to come in and do some workshops with us and take part in our groups, and always love to hear feedback. And I will see you next week.